The crystal wine glass shattered against the dining room wall. Red Cabernet dripping like blood down the cream wallpaper my mother-in-law had specially imported from France. 20 years of calculated humiliation had finally reached its breaking point, and the silence that followed was deafening. Sharon's perfectly lined lips parted in shock as she stared at me, the daughter-in-law she'd always considered beneath her precious son. "You don't belong here," she had sneered moments earlier, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the chandelier light as she gestured dismissively around the grand colonial home that had been in her family for generations. "You never have, Emily." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 months ago, when my father-in-law's estate was finally settled, he had left the deed to this very house in my name alone. Not to her, not to my husband James, to me, the outsider from the wrong side of the tracks, who wasn't supposed to last a year in this marriage. The weight of the folded document burned in my purse as family members froze mid-bite around the Thanksgiving table. 20 years of swallowed pride and forced smiles had culminated in this moment, and I was done playing by their rules. I wasn't born into wealth, not even close. My parents worked double shifts at the local factory in our small Midwestern town, where vacation meant a weekend camping trip to Lake Michigan, not summers in the Hamptons. We lived in a modest ranch house with mismatched furniture, but we had love, loud, messy, genuine love. Then I met James during my scholarship semester at Princeton. He was everything I wasn't supposed to have. Ivy League education, trust fund, and a last name that opened doors I didn't know existed. When he brought me home to meet his family in their sprawling Connecticut estate, Sharon Whitfield-Montgomery examined me like a counterfeit bill. "Harvard Medical, darling?" she asked, knowing full well I attended state school. "Oh, community college. How resourceful of you." James's father, Edward, was different. Quiet, kind, with eyes that carried the weight of compromise. He'd pull me aside during family gatherings and ask about my studies, my dreams. "She wasn't always like this," he once whispered, watching his wife critique the way I held my salad fork. "Success changed her. Don't let it change you." The Whitfield-Montgomery clan was New England aristocracy, the kind that traced their lineage to the Mayflower and donated wings to hospitals with their name etched in marble. Family gatherings were military operations, color-coordinated outfits for Easter photos, assigned seating at Christmas dinner based on that year's accomplishments. Every event was an opportunity for Sharon to remind me of my inadequacy. During my first Christmas with them, Sharon accidentally excluded me from the family photo, then feigned surprise. "Oh, Emily, I completely forgot. Well, perhaps next year you'll be more memorable." James confronted her later, but she dismissed it as an honest mistake, dabbing crocodile tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Then came the rehearsal dinner before our wedding. Sharon stood to give a toast, champagne flute in hand. "To James," she said, voice dripping with affected warmth, "who has always followed his heart, even when it leads him to unexpected places." She looked directly at me. "May this experimental phase bring you the lessons you need before settling down properly." The room fell silent. My parents shrank in their rented formal wear. Despite it all, James and I built a life together. I finished my degree, started a tech company that flourished against all odds, while James pursued environmental law against his family's wishes. We carved our own path, but every achievement came with Sharon's backhanded compliments. "How lucky you found success without proper connections," or "James has always had a charitable heart." When Edward was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last year, everything changed. In his final months, he spent hours alone with his attorney. Sharon assumed he was putting affairs in order, ensuring the family legacy remained intact. What none of us knew was that Edward had been watching, for 20 years, how his wife treated the woman his son loved. He'd seen my resilience, my refusal to fight fire with fire, my genuine care for James. 3 months after the funeral, an envelope arrived from Edward's attorney. Inside was the deed to the family home, transferred solely to my name, along with a letter I kept folded in my wallet. Emily, some debts can never be repaid. Consider this a small correction to the ledger. The house should belong to someone who understands its true value isn't in its walls, but in the love it shelters. Edward. I never told anyone, not even James. I kept working, kept smiling through Sharon's jabs, kept playing the role of the outsider, grateful for scraps of acceptance. Until that Thanksgiving, when the facade finally cracked and the truth spilled out in ways none of us could have predicted. Thanksgiving had always been Sharon's crowning performance, her annual display of domestic superiority. This year carried special weight, the first holiday season without Edward, and Sharon had invited the entire extended family, plus several close friends who happened to be Connecticut's social elite. The invitation came with instructions: formal attire, arrival at precisely 4 p.m., and a small contribution to the meal, which she'd inevitably critique and relegating to a side table. I spent days perfecting my grandmother's cranberry relish recipe, the one connection to my own family traditions I insisted on maintaining. James and I arrived exactly on time, greeted by the spectacle Sharon had created: professionally decorated maple leaf parlance cascading down the grand staircase, a tableau of gourds and candles on every surface, and the distinct scent of caterers working frantically in the kitchen, despite Sharon's claims of having prepared everything myself. "Emily, darling," Sharon air-kissed both cheeks, her Chanel No. 5 overwhelming. "How brave of you to wear that dress. Vintage is certainly making a comeback among certain crowds." She glanced meaningfully at my carefully chosen designer outfit, one that had cost a month's profit from my company. James squeezed my hand as we entered the living room, where his cousins, aunts, and uncles clustered in conversation pockets defined by net worth and social standing. Cousin Brent, with his hedge fund success, commanded the fireplace position, while Sharon's widowed sister Margaret hovered near the bar, already 3 martinis deep and filter-free. "There's the charity case who struck gold," Margaret slurred when she spotted me. "Tell me, did you ever imagine you'd end up here when you were serving milkshakes at that diner? Edward always had a soft spot for you, said you reminded him of someone." I smiled tightly. "Lovely to see you too, Margaret. How's the tennis elbow?" The pre-dinner mingling became an obstacle course of microaggressions. Sharon's friend Cecilia cornered me by the appetizers. "Your company is doing well. How fascinating. My husband says these tech bubbles are just modern-day tulip manias. Smart to cash in while you can." Throughout it all, I noticed Sharon watching me, calculating. She'd positioned family photos throughout the house, dozens of them, with one conspicuous pattern. I appeared in none. James noticed too, his jaw tightening as he surveyed the curated family history that erased his wife of 2 decades. When dinner was announced, Sharon had redesigned the traditional seating. Instead of being beside James at the main table, I was relegated to the spillover table in the adjacent breakfast nook with the teenagers and second cousins. James started to protest, but Sharon waved him off. "Emily won't mind, will you, dear? We need to keep Richard's investors together. You understand business necessity." Her smile never reached her eyes. Besides, you can catch up with young Olivia. She's considering community college too. I swallowed my pride and took the assigned seat, watching as Sharon positioned herself at the head of the main table, Edward's former place. The deed in my purse felt heavier with each passing moment. The tension escalated when Sharon began the traditional Whitfield-Montgomery gratitude ritual, each person sharing their greatest blessing from the year. When it reached James, he stood and raised his glass. I'm grateful for my incredible wife, who has shown more grace, intelligence, and strength than anyone I know. 20 years together, and I'm still amazed by her every day. His eyes found mine across the room divide. Sharon's smile froze. She cleared her throat and raised her hand, cutting off the moment. Well, that's lovely, though perhaps save the marriage counseling for less traditional settings. Nervous laughter rippled through her allies. The breaking point came during dessert. I'd returned from the kitchen with my cranberry relish, which had been forgotten when the sides were served. Sharon was midway through a story about the house. Of course, Edward always intended for the house to continue as the family gathering place after he was gone, she was saying. I've been considering some renovations now that I have full control of the property. Perhaps convert Emily and James's old room into a proper library. They so rarely visit anyway. We'd visit more if we felt welcome, James said quietly. Sharon's eyes narrowed. Don't be dramatic, darling. Family is always welcome here. Real family, anyway. She turned to me as I set down my forgotten dish. Though I suppose some people will always feel like outsiders, no matter how long they hover at the edges. Some people simply don't belong in certain worlds, despite how desperately they try to fit. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air, precise and poisonous. 20 years of calculated exclusion distilled into one unambiguous statement. What exactly do you mean by that, Sharon? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She smiled, the same smile she'd given me at our first meeting. Only that there's a natural order to things, dear. Water finds its level. You don't belong here. You never have. The silence that followed Sharon's declaration was absolute. Even the teenagers stopped texting under the table. James half rose from his chair, face flushed with anger, but I placed my hand on his shoulder. Let me handle this, I said quietly. 20 years of swallowed responses rose in my throat. I could feel the weight of Edward's letter in my purse, alongside the deed that none of them knew about. For a moment, I considered walking away, again, taking the high road I'd traveled for 2 decades. But something in me had finally broken loose. You know, Sharon, I said, my voice carrying across both tables, I've spent 20 years wondering what I did to make you hate me so much. I moved toward the main table, all eyes following. Was it my background, my education, or was it simply that your son chose me instead of the debutante you had picked out? Sharon's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. This is hardly the time or place. It's exactly the time and place, I interrupted, something I'd never done before. You've used every family gathering as your stage. Tonight, it's my turn. Cousin Brent shifted uncomfortably. Margaret took another gulp of wine. James watched me with a mixture of concern and pride. For 20 years, I continued, I've tried to earn a place in this family. I've endured your corrections of my table manners, your helpful suggestions about my appearance, your constant reminders of my origins. I kept thinking that if I just achieved enough, proved myself enough, you'd finally see me as worthy. Sharon's face hardened. This emotional display is precisely what separates. I'm not finished,
I said, surprised by my own authority. Edward saw me. Did you know that? While you were busy planning charity galas and country club luncheons, your husband and I talked about books, ideas, dreams. He asked about my company when you couldn't be bothered to remember its name. He saw my worth when you were determined to miss it. Sharon's composure slipped for an instant before she recovered. Edward was always soft-hearted. It made him weak in business and gullible in personal matters. If he occasionally overcompensated by being kind to you, it was out of pity, nothing more. The cruelty of her words hung in the air. Something inside me shifted. A final thread of hope that we might someday reconcile snapped clean. I reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope I'd carried for months, removing the deed and Edward's letter. Edward wasn't just kind, Sharon. He was observant, and he made a decision before he died that you should probably know about. James looked confused, Sharon's eyes fixed on the official document in my hand. 3 months ago, I received this from Edward's attorney, I said, placing the deed on the table.
It seems your husband had a different vision for this house than you realized. Sharon snatched the paper, her manicured fingers trembling slightly as she scanned it, her face drained of color. "This is absurd," she whispered. "This must be a forgery. Edward would never." "The deed to this house is in my name," I announced to the stunned room. "Not James's name, not in the family trust, mine alone." I slid Edward's letter across the table. Edward believed this house should belong to someone who values family for more than status, someone who understands that belonging isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts. Sharon's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You manipulated a dying man. You schemed behind our backs. This will never stand. My attorneys will." "The transfer is legal and binding," I interrupted. "I've had it reviewed by 3 separate law firms. But here's what you should know, Sharon. I never planned to use this against you. I kept it secret because I didn't want power over you. I just wanted respect." I looked around at the shocked faces of the extended family. I don't want to be the person who turns family gatherings into battlegrounds. That's why, effective immediately, I'm transferring ownership of this house to a trust. Sharon's laugh was bitter. "Of course, you and James will." "The trust will maintain this as a family home," I continued, "accessible to all Whitfield-Montgomery family members who want to gather in the spirit of actual kinship, including you, Sharon. But there's one condition. Genuine respect becomes the price of admission, not social standing." I picked up my purse and turned to James, whose expression reflected shock, pride, and a dozen questions. "I'm going home now. Our home," I said. "Anyone who wants to build a real family is welcome to join us for dessert. I made my grandmother's apple pie, too." As I walked toward the door, Sharon found her voice. "You can't just walk away. This house has been in our family for generations." I paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. "You're right about one thing, Sharon. I don't belong here. Not in a house poisoned by your version of family. But thanks to Edward, I get to decide what happens to it now." I walked out into the crisp November air, the weight of 20 years of silent submission lifting with each step down the driveway. The days that followed Thanksgiving were a tsunami of family chaos. My phone buzzed incessantly with text messages and calls, some supportive, others accusatory. James had stayed behind briefly to address his stunned relatives before joining me at our condo downtown. When he arrived, his expression was a mixture of confusion and wonder. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not angry, but genuinely perplexed as he sat beside me on our sofa. "At first, I was processing it myself," I admitted. "Then I realized, if I told you, you'd be caught between your mother and me. Again, I wanted to spare you that. James shook his head. Dad always played things close to the chest, but this, he took my hand. You know what this means, right? He saw everything, all these years, and he took your side. That night, we talked until dawn, not just about the house or Sharon's decades of calculated exclusion, but about what we wanted our definition of family to be moving forward. Sharon, predictably, launched an immediate legal offensive. Her attorneys sent threatening letters claiming undue influence and demanding immediate reversal of the deed transfer. When those tactics failed, she tried a different approach. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, she appeared at our door. "Emily," she said stiffly, her perfect composure slightly frayed at the edges, "we need to discuss terms." I invited her in, a power shift that wasn't lost on either of us. Our condo, while luxurious, lacked the ancestral gravitas of the Whitfield-Montgomery estate. Sharon perched on our sofa like a bird ready for flight. "Name your price," she said bluntly. "The house has been in our family for 4 generations. Whatever Edward was thinking, he clearly wasn't in his right mind." "This isn't about money," I replied. "It never has been." "Then what?" she demanded, frustration cracking her veneer. "Revenge? Is that it? You've waited all these years to humiliate me?" The question hung between us. 20 years ago, I might have craved revenge for her cruelty. Now, looking at her, this woman so terrified of losing her position, her identity, I felt something unexpected. Compassion. "I want what I've always wanted, Sharon. A family where I don't have to constantly prove my worth." What happened next surprised us both. Sharon's carefully constructed facade crumbled, tears spilling down her cheeks, smearing her impeccable makeup. "You don't understand," she whispered. "That house is all I have left of him." In that moment, I glimpsed the woman beneath the armor, someone who had defined herself through her marriage, her social position, and most of all, her home. Without those markers, who was she? Meanwhile, unexpected allies emerged from the extended family. Cousin Brent called to confess he'd always admired my business acumen, but had been too intimidated by Sharon to say so. Margaret, in a moment of wine-induced clarity, sent a handwritten note. "Edward talked about you all the time, said you reminded him of himself before money changed everything." Most surprisingly, Sharon's sister Catherine, who had missed Thanksgiving due to a conflict with her daughter's college parents' weekend, invited us to lunch. Unlike Sharon, Catherine had married for love rather than status, choosing a high school music teacher over the banking heir their parents had selected. "Sharon wasn't always like this," Catherine confided. "Before she married into the Whitfield-Montgomery legacy, she was just Sharon Gavis from Bridgeport. Her father was a plumber. She reinvented herself so completely that sometimes I think she genuinely forgot where she came from." The revelation stunned me. Sharon, the ultimate arbiter of old money values and proper lineage, had come from working-class roots just like mine. "Why didn't anyone ever say anything?" I asked. Catherine sighed. "It became the family secret. Edward knew, of course, but he promised never to tell. I think that's why he always had a soft spot for you. He saw in you the authentic person Sharon had buried." Armed with this new understanding, I made a decision about the house. Working with an attorney, I established the Whitfield-Montgomery Family Foundation, transferring the property into a trust with a detailed charter. The house would remain a gathering place for all branches of the family, with a rotating board of family members making decisions about its use and upkeep. 3 months after Thanksgiving, we held the first foundation meeting. To everyone's shock, Sharon attended, sitting quietly in the back as I outlined the vision for the house's future. This home has witnessed 4 generations of this family's history, I said. Its walls hold memories of births, deaths, celebrations, and losses. Rather than letting it become a battleground, we're transforming it into common ground. The plan included renovating the carriage house into a living space for Sharon, ensuring she wouldn't be homeless while removing her ability to control access to the main house. We would host regular family gatherings where genuine connection, not social climbing, would be the focus. As the meeting concluded, Sharon approached me, her demeanor subdued. "Edward left me a letter too," she said quietly, avoiding my eyes.
I've only just been able to read it. She hesitated. He said he hoped his decision would force me to remember who I was before the money, before the name. He said you were the only one brave enough to stand up to me, and that's why he trusted you with our home. She looked up, her eyes rimmed with tears. I don't know how to be anyone except who I've been for 40 years. Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone, I suggested. That summer, we held the first Whitfield-Montgomery family reunion at the estate. James fired up the grill while cousins, aunts, uncles, and extended family members spilled onto the lawn. Children played tag between the oak trees that had witnessed generations of family history. The most remarkable sight was Sharon in jeans and a casual blouse, teaching her great-niece how to make the Davis family lemonade recipe, something from her past she'd kept buried for decades. "It's not perfect," James observed as we watched from the porch, "but it's real." The house that had been weaponized as a symbol of exclusion was transforming into something Edward had envisioned, a true family home where belonging wasn't earned through pedigree or performance, but freely given through acceptance. Standing in the garden that Edward once tended with such care, I watched Sharon laugh with her great-niece, a sound I'd never heard in 20 years of knowing her. The path from that Thanksgiving confrontation to today wasn't straight or simple. There were legal battles, tearful conversations, and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But family, real family, is worth fighting for, even when the fight looks nothing like you expected. The deed to this house changed hands, but the true transformation wasn't in the property. It was in us. In me, finding the courage to stand my ground. In Sharon, slowly rediscovering the woman she'd buried beneath decades of pretense. In our extended family, learning that belonging isn't dictated by bloodlines or bank accounts, but created through genuine connection. Edward knew what he was doing all along. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't measured in square footage or antique furniture. It's the chance to rewrite a story that isn't serving anyone. If you're watching this and feeling like an outsider in your own life, remember, you don't need permission to belong. Sometimes the very people trying to exclude you are fighting their own battles with belonging. My mother-in-law once told me I didn't belong here. She was right, but not in the way she meant. None of us belong in places where we have to diminish ourselves to be accepted. We belong where we can be fully seen, even with all our flaws and complications. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more journeys of finding authentic connection in unexpected places. Family is too important to be defined by those who would use it as a weapon. It should be a shelter, not a fortress with walls to keep people out.